Whitney Houston used to sing that children are our future and we should teach them well and let them lead the way. It's a bright and inspiring thought for our children, isn't it? Beautiful, laughter, letting them lead the way into the future. But what happens if our children are broken, they're abandoned or abused? Do broken children lead the way to the future as well? Broken children, it's what we're talking about right now. Welcome to Right Now. I'm Jennifer Schuchmann, and today I'm really excited to have our guest, Josh Talkington. Josh, you are a former television journalist. You used to have a morning show. You've been a country DJ.
True.
You've done all kinds of different things, but you're not doing anything in media right now. Well,
I'm not.
Other than this show.
This show, yeah. Yeah, you invited me. I think 18 people called in sick, and so I wound up in the seat here. But no, I'm excited to be here.
Thanks for being the last on our list. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, we've been friends for a good little while, and so probably for the last 3 years full-time I've been in ministry working with at-risk. I kind of hate that phrase, but it's the phrase we all identify with. So at-risk children, impoverished children over the last 3 years.
Yeah, it's the Hope Center in Douglas, Georgia.
That's correct.
Tell us a little bit just about the kinds of kids you work with.
Kinds of kids we work with. It's difficult kind of to describe kind of a blanket statement for all of them because they come from different backgrounds, but for the most part, about 85% of our kids are from a fatherless home. Most of them don't have any idea who dad is. In a lot of cases, there's drug activity in that family, gang activity in the family. It's not rare for the mom or the grandma in the family to be walking the streets as a prostitute or a drug addict or whatever the case may be. So those are the types of kids we're working with, kind of like the forgotten children, the children that maybe a lot of people just walk on by and forget about.
That's tough to hear.
Yeah.
So the Hope Center is what you work at. What exactly do you do and how do you help these kids?
Well, back in 1998, my parents, my mom and dad had been in ministry for years, and my dad had been a pastor at various churches throughout the Midwest. And in 98, they were traveling through Douglas, Georgia. They stopped for a tent revival, and it happened to be in this area called the Sand Ridge or Oak Park. And if you can imagine, it's just sand roads and dirt roads and some trailers and houses, very run down, some shacks, and it looks kind of like a third world country in different parts. And my parents just really felt this pull on their heart. The evangelist who was there that night said to my dad, you know, I've been to Mexico as an evangelist and as a missionary, and there are places there that aren't this bad. This is worse than a lot of places there. And so my parents were supposed to go down to Florida for vacation, but God really convicted them and said, I want you here. And so they went back to Illinois, sold everything they had, and moved to Douglas. Just knew there was a need there to help people, really. And it evolved into an after-school program, a GED program. Folks can come there and do their laundry and get bill assistance and all sorts of different things. But it just started with God saying to my parents, hey, I need you here. Don't exactly know what I'm going to do with you, but I need you here. So since 1998, they've just been there serving. I remember my dad, because I was in television and radio back then and chasing those dreams. And I came there at 22 years old, and I said, why in the world would you come here? You know what I mean? Why in the world would you come here? And I remember my dad just kind of matter-of-fact saying, I believe if Jesus walked the earth today, he would stop in a place like this. And so that's just kind of stuck with him and stuck with me, and I think that's still true today.
So they're helping, what, 5, 10, 15 kids now, something like that?
Our after-school program, which is kind of what we're known for, but it's not all that we do. Our after-school program has an enrollment of about 80 right now.
Wow.
And so it's from second grade up through senior in high school. Wow. We have about 4,000 to 5,000 people living in that area in our community in Coffee County. And on top of our after-school program, during the day, we'll get probably 5 or 10 families come need food assistance or clothing or bill assistance, and some coming looking for work. And then in the summer, we have a summer program for children that is anywhere from 100 to 150 children that come 3 days a week for anywhere from 4 to 7 weeks, depending on funding.
So this has grown tremendously over the years.
It really has, and it has from day one been Bible-based and the foundation in Scripture, and we get no federal or state funding, and it's been a total God thing to keep us there since 1998.
I want to come back and talk more about that, but what I start with when we get back is I want to hear a little bit more about your journey from media to now working there. That seems like kind of an interesting road. So we're going to talk more with Josh about how he came from being on television to now helping people probably who were reported about in some of those news stories. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back with more of this. Welcome back. We're talking with Josh Talkington, who works at Hope Center in Douglas, about some of the impoverished and abandoned and abused kids that he's working with. But I want to back up and hear a little bit about more your story. Were you broken and abandoned and abused as a child?
I was not. You know, we never had much, so we grew up not with a lot of money, and a lot of preachers' kids, I think, can relate to that journey. But definitely, I look back and think I had the greatest parents in the world. Always provided, always took care. We always had what we needed, maybe not always what we wanted, but I wasn't by any means broken, no.
So did you go on, you had this job in media, was that like, did you want to do that always, or how did that happen?
That was it. From the time I was 5 or 6, I used to have my mom, back then with the VCR and the VHS tape, I would have her record The Price is Right because I was going to be Bob Barker. That was my thing. And so I had this dream to be on television. And
you wanted the girls? Is that what it was?
I wanted the Barker's Beauties and the prizes and the money. And so I chased that dream, and I went into journalism when I got to college and just kind of pursued that head on. I wouldn't say I didn't necessarily seek God out on that, but it was more about me than it was anything else. I just wanted to be on TV. And so I became a reporter and a radio show host, and I worked in Jacksonville, Florida, and Las Vegas, and Tampa, and then in Nashville as a radio DJ. And I just
You were successful. You had your own morning show, or co-hosted a morning show. You had a drive time radio show. You did all this stuff. Yet at some point there was a story you worked on that sort of just changed your heart about.
Yeah, always the toughest stories for journalists, I think they will tell you, is something when a child is hurting or a child is missing or whatever. And for me, that was back. My last month or so in television news was a little girl by the name of Jessica Lunsford, who she had gone missing in a little town called Homosassa, Florida, near Tampa. And long story short, she was kidnapped out of her grandparents' trailer by the neighbor who was a sex offender. And he kept her in the house, and they thought, you know, he sexually abused her and possibly buried her alive in the backyard. They found her body several days later. I was there for that whole thing, got close to her family. And it was just one of those stories that just like tore your heart out. You know, you weren't part of the family, but you felt for the family so deeply. I stayed with that until the man was found guilty and convicted in Miami, was sentenced to the death penalty. And right when that case was over, and I remember her dad came out of the courthouse and all the national media was set up, and he walked right past them all and came to us because we'd been there kind of with him and crying with him and praying with him. And so I got to interview him, and it was just this real emotional thing. And afterwards, I just knew this is it for me. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to cover these stories anymore. I don't want to really be a part of that anymore. So I went in a different direction.
But something in your heart broke for kids who were in that situation. And so you didn't go directly to the Hope Center from there. You went through these other jobs, but eventually you found yourself visiting mom and dad. Is that what happened? Or?
Yeah, you know, probably about 7 years ago, I went there for an extended period of time, probably 6 months or so, and I was in between things. I was getting out of the media, and I was starting my own video production company, and I wound up there, and I just fell in love with these kids. Kids that don't feel love in a whole lot of other places, just loving them unconditionally despite what clothes they have on and what shoes they have on. I just loving them right where they are, and I fell in love with them, but I went ahead and kept kind of pursuing some dreams. And 3 years ago, God just kind of laid on my heart, listen, I want you to go back there. Those kids that you laid a little foundation with, now I want you to have real relationship with. So 3 years ago, I came back full-time as the after-school program director, youth minister, as well as we have a college ministry that I work with. And it's just been an amazing, crazy, unbelievable 3 years.
So can you tell us any stories about maybe a relationship you've had with one of those children, or how you've watched them grow? Or?
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's one thing when you're working with kids and you're talking about the Bible, you know, it's one thing to go and say, here, let me teach you about Adam and Eve, let me teach you about Noah, let me teach you about these stories. It's another thing to say, let me show you the compassion of Jesus. You know, let me really be compassionate and give you this love. And so we were doing a story one day about a guy who was on our board for years, a dear friend of my dad's named Dr. Birch, and he had just passed away. And he was probably the most compassionate man you would have ever met. He had a fishing pond, and he would let kids come and fish, and they'd have a fish fry, and it was just the greatest thing. So he passed away, and I was giving a story to the little kids on compassion, and I had a picture of him up, and one of the little girls afterwards came up to me, and she was in the 3rd grade, and she sat at a table with me, and she said, Mr. Josh, let me ask you a question. Are you telling me that people who don't even know us, they don't even know our names, you're telling me they send money and they come here to do things for us and they don't even know us? And I said, well, yeah, that's how compassion works. And I explained it to her like a 3rd grader could understand, you know. And she walks away. The next day she comes back in, And she said, you remember yesterday we were having that conversation? And I said, yeah, I remember. And she said, well, you talked about donations from people that could help people. And I said, that's right. And so she reaches into her pocket, right? And she pulls out 35 cents. Oh. And she lays the 35 cents on my desk, and she said, I'd like to make a donation. I thought maybe that could help somebody. Oh. And so that was 3 years ago, and I put it in a little case, and it still sits there on the desk. So during the hard days, you know, the crazy days, the pull your hair out days, because you have those when you work with kids, I just look down at that and remember this sweet little girl who came from a broken system herself, right? She was coming up in an environment where everyone was living off the government. Everyone had the handout to a certain degree. And she was saying, that broken system doesn't work for me because now I know what it's all about. And that to me is just priceless. And that's one of 1,000 stories that I could share with you.
There's one story that you told me about a young man now, but he started out when he was just little. And can you tell me about the wagon and the whole?
Oh, yeah. A little boy, his name, we call him JB. And JB, we don't let kids come to Hope Center until they're about 6 years old. But he was just one of those kids. One, he refused to stop coming. So at three years old, he just showed up. And he used to come. At the time, we had one little block building, and now we have several buildings on the property. And he would come, and he would pull up a little wagon behind him. And he was usually wearing some red shorts and some cowboy boots. And he would come pulling up, and he would ring the doorbell. And then they could see him on the camera, and he would open the little side door to the big wagon. And he would get in the wagon and close the door, and he would sit there. And my mom would come out, and he would order breakfast. And it was just this little guy.
Because she always fed him because he didn't have.
So we fell in love with him, and he's still there as a 16-year-old now. And he's one of our leaders. He helps teach the younger kids. He's there to help clean up, to help cook. And so now he is at 16, and as crazy as it sounds, he is taking on kind of like a discipleship role, helping disciple little kids, you know. So to see that, again, from a broken family, will be one of the only ones probably to graduate high school. We have all these hopes and dreams for him. And it's just kind of the power of what a little bit of love, like real genuine love, not this just show up and say, hey, whatever you need, and then kind of walk away. But I'm in this with you. I hurt with you. I'm in the boat with you. I'm praying for you. Just shows what a little bit of the right kind of compassion can do for somebody.
It's so hard to hear because I listen to you and I'm like, I want to help them all. And at the same time, I'm like, but I can't, you know, like, what do you, like, how do you do this every day? And what do you say to people like me who want to help but don't even know where to start? Or...
I know. You know what I would recommend? I think that Hope Center, I think there are places like Hope Center all over this country. I think there are smaller ministries that are standing unashamedly on the Word of God, and state officials will come in and say, if you drop the Bible, we will give you all the funding you need, but we all refuse.
Wait, so they could have additional funding from the government, but because they teach the Bible, they can't? In
our case, with lawmakers who have come in a lot of times, sometimes the closed-door meeting is, if you would just drop the Bible and just do an after-school program or just help people, we can get you more funding. Wow. But being Bible-based means faith-based a lot of times, and sometimes there's a difference. Some people say we're faith-based, and I always say that we are Bible-based, being faith-based and kind of open to any faith.
Any religion or faith,
and so I look at that, and I'll just kind of sidetrack a little bit. There was a young man that came in a couple of years ago, and he was, the night before, his mom had caught him trying to hang himself. He had just 14 years old. He just kind of come to the end of his rope, so to speak, and so he was going to give up his life, and his mom found him just in time. So he came in, and he's in my dad's office, and we're crying with him and talking with him and all of that. And I always look at this scene, and I wonder what just kind of a faith-based place would do. Would you just open a book and say, okay, pick a religion? Whatever works for you, just pick whatever makes you feel good. Because I know in those cases, we open the Bible and say, let me show you what can help with your pain. Not make everything perfect in your life, but let me show you what's worth living for. And so I thank God that in those moments, we are unashamedly on the Word of God, where we can go to a young man and say, let us pray with you. You know, let us read some scripture with you.
Let me ask you this, though. I know adults who have a difficult day. And God doesn't do what they thought God should do that day. And so they question or doubt or get angry. How does a kid who's never even known love, who doesn't even know what a father is, when you come in and he said, yeah, I tried to hang myself because nobody cares, nobody loves me, doesn't matter, whatever he said, how do you convince him that the Bible has any worth, that there's a God who loves him? I mean, how do you even do that?
It's tough, and it's one of those things where you find out real quick, you start wondering, are you for real or not in this? Because do you just want to spend 10 minutes talking to him, and then he can go back and play in the game room or whatever the case is? Or do you really, over the next 2 months or 3 months or a year or 2 years, want to be there for him daily? You need to call me, here's my number. You need to come over, here's this. You need to talk, here's this. So I think that's where we find out as people who work with children who are hurting or broken, as you put it earlier, are we for real in that? Like, are we really for real in that commitment? Because if we are, it's going to be some long nights. It's going to be some sleepless nights. But the reward on the end of it so oftentimes, when you see a young man like that 2 years from now saying, you know what, I don't have those suicidal thoughts anymore. I feel better about that, and still refer to that conversation. So I guess kind of the short answer is that's those moments where you find out really if you are going to be on board with what you've been preaching about to the kids for so long.
All right, so to be really honest, I feel like I would be on board for having a heart for these kids, but not having the get up and go do it. Like,
right.
I'm glad you're doing it.
Yeah.
You know
I am too. I am too. Yeah.
I'm really glad you're doing it. But like,
yeah.
Like, do I want to do that? You know, like, I mean, I want to be the person who does it, but
right.
to like.
Yeah, but you even said a while ago, your heart was exposed a while ago when you said you want to help all these children.
I do.
So you helping looks different than me helping them, right? Like, I think sometimes we get caught up in, man, I hear him talking about it. I've got to go do that.
Yeah.
I have to go start that. But your helping is different than my helping. My helping, for whatever reasons, felt like it had to be getting my hands dirty. Your helping may be praying for us, writing a check, calling to encourage, or whatever the case may be. But the fact is, those of us who have a heart, we all have a role we can play in the process, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to go be hands-on, and that shouldn't make us feel guilty, because you don't want to go or don't have either the ability or the desire or the time to do that. Shouldn't make you feel guilty and say, man, I can't even play a part in this.
Yeah, that's really helpful, because I think about your parents, and I think I should sell my house, and I should go there, and I should do this. And then I'm like, but I don't want to live in Douglas, Georgia, and I don't, you know. But I think you're right. I think there are different ways that we can help out in other things. So if somebody at home is watching the show and they're just sitting back and they're like, man, I'd like to do something for, maybe an organization in their town or something. Like, where would you tell them to go? I mean, there's lots of great organizations, right? Like, there's Boys and Girls Clubs, YMCA, but like you said, they're probably getting funding from other kinds of sources, and the local Bible-based program may not be getting.
So I think they're probably struggling. A lot of the Bible-based in their community are struggling.
I'm sure. Yeah,
I would say whatever community you live in, whether there are national organizations there or local organizations, I would just take, this is just me, my preference, and I know I'm biased, but I would take a really long look at those Bible-based programs, large or small, that you know in your heart are really doing the work that they say they're doing. If they say they're doing an after-school program with 80 children and you show up one day and there's 12 kids there, there's a problem. So do your homework, check it out, make sure they're doing, seek God. God will guide you, and whether or not, we've all been given some discernment if we're followers of Christ, where we can figure out if this is legit or not. I wouldn't shy away from the national organizations. I would just want to know, are they getting $1 million grant from the government or from the school district or whatever? Because I know in our cases, I'll tell you why we are still alive after, since 1998, $50 checks, $100 checks, $20 checks from little old ladies across the country or churches we've spoken at. We don't get $10,000 checks and $20,000 checks. We get those small checks. And so for people to think, man, my $10 wouldn't make a difference, well, it does make a difference, because it costs about $17 a week to take care of a kid, one child, for their food, whatever homework needs they have as far as school supplies, whatever clothing they need. So if you sent $20, you're taking care of one kid for the week. So when you think of it in those terms, a little bit of money can really be a big help for organizations. So
I like the way you've talked about this, because my thought as you were talking earlier is like, I feel so guilty, like I should be doing this. What am I doing with my life? And so I think thinking about other ways, maybe somebody watching is like really good in business, and so being able to fund, and they don't have the time or the ability to get there. But let me ask you this: what are the rewards for getting dirty? Because I think too often we'd really rather stay in our suburban churches and let somebody else do the dirty work kind of thing. But there are benefits that you have from doing that, right? So talk about some of that.
And I don't think I ever told you this, because this was a couple of years ago, and it just kind of hit me now. Do you know, a couple of years ago, you sponsored a kid for Christmas. We do a Christmas program, and it was $150, I think, and we have a full Christmas for a kid. Do you know that your girl one year was that little girl I told the story about a while ago? The 35-cent girl.
Oh, no.
It just struck me that it was her. Because you had a boy one year, a little boy one year, but it was her, I think 2 years ago, was her. Yeah, so it just kind of hit me. So you see how it all goes together. Rewards, I'll tell you rewards, and they may not seem like rewards, right, to people, but we had a little boy a few years ago. We took him to church, and I looked down and I noticed his shoes were really too small for him. He was about 5th grade, and he had just these tiny shoes on. And so I said, let's step outside for a minute, because you don't want to embarrass a kid in front of other kids, even if they're all struggling, right? Even if they're all wearing hand-me-downs and they're all wearing. So I took him outside and I said, what size shoes do you wear? And he said, I wear about 7s. Took the shoes off. They were 3.5s. And he had been wearing those shoes because his other brothers needed shoes, and he was the oldest brother. And so I just went, and we were near Walmart, and got him a pair of shoes and put them on him. And the reward of the smile on his face, like I got something, my first brand new pair of shoes, and they weren't Air Jordans. They weren't $100 shoes. And just these are the rewards that keep you going, the smiles on the faces. Now, you may want to pull your hair out tomorrow because that kid does something. They're still kids, right?
Right.
But those little moments make you come back for more and more and more and more and more.
Right.
Yeah.
So, because I know you personally, I know that there were some years where maybe you just sort of felt kind of empty and just felt like you were searching for something.
Yeah.
And when I hear you talk now, it's almost like you're a parent to these kids. You know, I mean, you were telling me about you got a call at 5 in the morning from a kid going, "Can you take me to school today?" You know.
No. No.
No, what you said was, "Call me in 2 hours when you're ready to go."
Hours.
Yeah. So, how has it changed your insides? Like, how have you changed?
I say weekly, and I could say it daily, that these kids have taught me far more than I've taught them. You know, about endurance, about staying in the fight, about not giving up, you know, regardless of how bad things get. And I know when I described my media days, there were moments where the spotlight was the brightest and you should be the happiest. And you can maybe relate to this, where you felt the loneliest and the most empty. And so then I see them, and they have reason to be discouraged.
Yeah.
I was making good money, and I was on TV, and I was interviewing famous folks, and they live in this little world that they wonder if they can ever get out of it. You know, mom and dad are living off of the government, and is this how my life's going to be? Am I going to be a drug addict? Am I ever going to leave here? And so I just continually say, man, they are teaching me far more than I could ever teach them. And to spend 20 minutes with them and let them just kind of talk to you and share their story and share where they are, you just go home and say, I don't really have anything that I should be complaining about. You know, I don't have all the money in the world that I would want, and I definitely took a financial hit to work in ministry. But when you work with kids like that, you just realize what's important. And it's not what you used to think was important when you work with kids.
So it's changed you.
Yeah, I mean, I would have never thought. So when I moved there, I thought, I'm just going to work with kids. Oh, they're so cute. Aren't they precious? I'm just going to work with kids. And then it became, I'm going to work with kids, and I'm really going to work with the youth, and I'm going to spend more time with them. Then I'm going to work with the college students. And so then I became a youth minister at a local church. And then I said, I know the one thing God will never call me to do is preach. Ever.
As soon as you say something like that, it's all over, right?
So then those opportunities started happening, and then I started preaching. And I remember having a prayer, and I said, God, this was not part of the deal. I was coming here to work with kids, and God kind of said, whose deal? Like, who was making the deal? And so I think it just helped me kind of prioritize some things. He called me there, kind of like he did to my parents. I shouldn't have expected everything that was going to happen. I shouldn't have had this idea of exactly how it was going to be, because God started to really open some doors that I didn't even expect. So
that's really cool. So basically, you've got this story where you were broadcasting somebody else's news, and now essentially you're broadcasting the good news from a pulpit into kids who need to hear it.
I'm trying. Yeah, I don't call it preaching, because I still say, I'm not a preacher. Right? I'll come speak at your church, but I'm not a preacher. But I just try to be as obedient as possible.
That's awesome.
Not perfect by any means.
We're going to take a break, but we're going to come back and hear more from Josh Talkington and about the Hope Center in Douglas, Georgia, where he's working. Thanks for being a part of this, and stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Right Now. We've been talking with Josh Talkington, who works at the Hope Center in Douglas, Georgia, where he's working with kids who are impoverished, abused, abandoned, just, you know, the kids who really need some help. And I'm reminded of something I've heard my pastor say once, which was, do for one what you wish you could do for many.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we look at all of the needs and we're overwhelmed with it. So Talk about
That's
that.
kind of the Mother Teresa way of looking at things. You can't do everything for all, but you can do something for one. That's kind of that whole model. And I agree with that, especially when you look around the world. I think it's every year almost 7 million cases are called in of abuse and neglect of children in the United States. So you're thinking, not in my community, but
larger
7
than
million.
the city of Atlanta.
And in the United States, every day between 4 and 7 children die as a result of neglect or abuse. And so if you think it's not in your community, if you think kids aren't being abused, or and not that all of our kids are in that situation, but some are, if you think that your kids aren't being malnourished, there is a child or even an adult in your community. And don't get this wrong. I'm not talking about somebody who just continually wants to take advantage of you, because that's a very dangerous cycle to get caught up in. But there's somebody likely who's not even asking you for help, right? That's the one who's not coming to you saying, give me, give me, give me, who's in your community right now, or your church, or you work with them, who you could be helping right now in your little circle.
That's awesome. I hope you've been as inspired today as I have to go out and help one person, one child, to donate your time or your money or your efforts, or just to be a part of praying for these kids and the good work that's being done out there. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this. You can email us at rightnowtopics@gmail.com. Find us on Twitter at rightnow57 and Facebook at rightnowtopics. Thanks for being a part of the show. We're so glad. We consider you just as important part of the show as any of our guests that are here. And we're so thankful, Josh, that you were here today and just to talk about that, and really inspired by what you had to say.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being a part of Right Now, and join us again next time.